Hello, mein friends und freundins, and welcome to another episode of the Troglodyte channel. Today I will try to assemble this German Sd.Kfz 222 leichter Panzerspa-Wagen from Hobby Boss in 1/35 scale. A beautiful kit with many impressive details, but also a bit of a pain in the butt when it comes to the assembly method. And yes, at some points it became a little bit difficult, a little bit confusing, but nevertheless I managed to get through with it. After all, this is what scale modeling is all about. Trying to figure out ways how to untie all of these small Gordian knots that occur from time to time during our beautiful journey of assembly. So come on, join me to see how I did it. I started with the backbone of this armored vehicle, which in this case it is positioned in the belly rather than the back. And I'm talking of course about the chassis. Carefully following the instructions, I started the assembly of all of these tiny parts, but before I would glue them in place, I would of course sand them down with some sandpaper. I tried to be as precise as possible and carefully glued each part in its designated position. And as the build was slowly growing in shape, piece by piece, I couldn't help but admire the amazing amount of detail that was put on this model kit. They sure do put a lot of labor to their model kits there in Hobby Boss. And I think that what they lack in simplicity and ease, they definitely make up for in detail and the beauty that is the end result. For there are many tiny parts that make up this beautiful but complex armored machine. And the instructions at times can become a little bit vague. I mean, I understand them after all. There is a lot of parts. And of course it is not possible to print a whole volume of blueprints as the assembly guide. It's not very difficult for somebody to make a small mistake if they are not focused enough following the guidelines, as you will soon see on this video. I myself made quite a few of them, to be honest. The wheels look really nice, and also an extra plus, the tires are made of rubber, which not only adds more detail, but also makes it easier for me to paint them later, since I can position them or remove them when I need to. And there you have it, the chassis finally... Nope, there's a few more parts to be put in place. Eventually, I moved on assembling the interior of the vehicle, because I was planning to keep a couple of windows open as well as the driver's door. I have a very special diorama scene planned for this tiny little car. So, pretty much the whole interior had to be assembled and later to be painted in order to glue the upper and lower hulls together. Over here I'm assembling the tiny windows, from the inside as well as from the outside. And again, many small parts that need to be glued together within relative precision and harmony. In between the assemblies, I would add a few more extra details, such as this 3D printed latch with a padlock on it from Lithocraft company. And I must say it looks pretty amazing. I pretty much completed the assembly of the lower hull, and finally it was time to make it one with the chassis. I began to assemble the gun turret, which was the most complicated part in this build, and for that reason I did it in 3 parts, completing some other simpler sub-assemblies in between. The gun turret, with all of its components, has a large number of tiny parts that need to be put together, either in smaller sub-assemblies or directly glued to the main piece, as much accurately as possible. Everything has to be aligned and leveled with the rest of its surroundings. Although the instructions do not make it that easy, they try to present the assembly as clear as possible, but with so many little parts, I totally understand that from time to time it might be a little bit confusing. I had to go back myself a few times in this build and unstuck something that it was already glued in place, because it wasn't properly positioned the first time. On my second break from the gun turret assembly, I dealt with the photo-etched parts that would go over and under the windows. This was also a little bit challenging because the Hobby Boss photo-etched is slightly thicker than the ones other companies make. Or at least this is how it looks to me. And also I do not have a photo-etched jig, so to bend them was also a little bit demanding. I glued a couple of pieces upside down because I guess I wasn't paying enough attention to the assembly manual. But I managed to fix it, and I did the same with the photo-etched parts of the turret. I think they look pretty good. Then I went on it again, and finally on this third part of the assembly I managed to complete the gun turret. Of course I encountered numerous problems with the positioning and the alignment of both of the guns, so I had to follow a couple of devious methods in order to make everything fit, such as the trimming of a few parts here and there. The good thing is that all of the crooked parts that ended up not being aligned that well are positioned well down in the interior of the hull, so they are not that visible in the first place. But in general, if you look at it from the top, everything looks relatively straight, so it's not that bad. It was then time to glue the upper and lower hulls in one. But in order to do that, first I had to complete the interior. I added a box and a couple of tarps and a nice sniper's rifle to the rear of the compartment, and I've realized that once I've put the turret in place, they will be barely visible. But that's okay, I know they are there. And now you do as well. I went on and primed the interior of the vehicle with a light grey spray paint. Once it was dry, I airbrushed over it with a white acrylic. Then it was time to paint all of the smaller details on the inside, which I did rather hastily, but it was alright because after all 90% of it will not be visible at all by the time this assembly ends. Nevertheless, once the brown wash covered all of the hard-to-reach spots, it ended up looking pretty good. I also added the decal on the dashboard, if you can call it so. It looks good. It was finally time to glue it into one solid piece of armored hull. The positioning of the front mudguards also was a little bit tricky, because it wasn't exactly 100% specific on the assembly manual, and a couple of photo-etched parts wouldn't fit perfectly in place as they should. So I ended up removing the left one, breaking it slightly through the process, and then I attempted to repositioning it, realizing that it wouldn't fit because of the shovel that was positioned right next to it. Eventually I broke off the shovel and its brand new 3D printed hinge, which made me feel pretty bad, only to realize in the end that the shovel was correctly positioned and it was only me who made the mistake with the mudguard in the first place. Nevertheless, I rectified all of the mess that I've made and went on through with the build. I also made a small fail with this beautiful photo-etched mesh, which is the cover of the gun turret. And while the plastic parts on top of it were glued neatly tight in place, once I put them side by side, I realized that they were not aligned to each other. But now it's too late to remove them because I will break the whole piece, I suppose. Next, I added a few extra parts of my own around the vehicle, such as a couple of jerry cans on the sides, an ammunition box on the front mudguard with a couple of extra hinges, and also a tarp made of epoxy putty on the back of the vehicle. I secured most of this stuff around the car with a few leather straps made of copper, to which I added some simple belt buckles. Simple, but it gets the job done. Finally, I placed the mesh and my Leichter Panzerspa-Wagen was complete. The assembly, that is. As I said before, I'm planning to put this vehicle on a diorama, and I wanted a couple of figures to accompany it. I have this beautifully sculpted SS officer from Mantis Miniatures, whose pose is exactly formed to fit this vehicle. But he just wouldn't fit in there. And because I didn't want to remove pieces of the turret in order to make him fit, I decided to amputate his left leg and reposition it. But again, he just wouldn't fit. So I decided to go with only one figure. This grumpy gentleman who is reading a map. And no, he is not wearing a Zhivago sweater, this is just white blue tack to hold his head in place. And that was it. This complicated from time to time assembly is finally complete. And what a beautiful butterfly came out of this mishmash of plastic and photo-etched pieces, eh? I learned quite a few new things through the course of this challenging build. For example, I learned that the 1922 original Nosferatu film was released a few months before the tragic Smyrna catastrophe, which happened that same year. Now this is pretty crazy if you think about it. But I learned a couple of things about scale modeling as well. Sincerely, I am very happy with the way this tiny model came out. I was a little bit worrying at the beginning, with this being actually an armored car and not a tank. Things were much more complicated through the assembly, especially with the chassis. But to my eyes it looks leveled and straight, except for the wheels of course, which I haven't glued at this point. I will after the paint job. So in conclusion, this is a pretty awesome result. I've already forgotten all about the hard times it gave me. If you like it too, mein friends und freundins, press the like button and subscribe to my channel for future videos. If you like to tell me something, please do so. I will be very happy to hear from you or read from you in the comments. This is it for now, friends and freundins. I will see you in the next episode where I will paint and weather this beautiful machine of death. Until then, take care of yourselves and try to have some fun. Bye bye.